Today we'll be discussing convergent evolution. The evolutionary analysis textbook definition of convergent evolution is a similarity between species that is caused by a similar but evolutionary independent response to a common evolutionary problem. Now, to elaborate, different organisms come from different ancestors, and similar features can develop or evolve at completely different time periods or environments. An example of such convergence is in bats and whales that both use echolocation, or, like in our article, sharks and seals which use swimming patterns called undulating flight that are similar to flying patterns in birds. None of these animals share a common lineage or ancestor, yet have similar mechanisms that they can benefit from. As we know, evolution is the changes made to a species over generations. We can relate convergence to this by the similarity in changes between certain species. This way, we can get a look into understanding lineages and how over time, many organisms use the same mechanisms after natural selection and other factors. There are some concepts of evolution that can be tied to convergent evolution, the first being homoplasy. Convergent evolution gives rise to homoplasy because similar traits develop in different organisms, like in bat and bird wings. Reversal evolution goes hand in hand with convergence because instead of gaining both traits, organisms evolve by losing traits, like in snakes and their legs. Divergent evolution can also be mentioned because it's the opposite of convergent evolution due to organisms deriving from the same ancestor developing different traits. We know that convergent evolution is a result of genetic changes due to mutations and natural selection. This helps us to explain lineages, environments, and characteristics of organisms. In the adaptations made between different species in convergent evolution, a gap exists in knowing specific time periods where the changes occur. In the past, this was addressed by studying lineages in phylogenetic trees and extinction patterns to help narrow and not really give specifics. A gap is also relevant in knowing the outcomes that already occurred that would never occur again if the species were allowed to have a restart. In our article, the gap is determined by which other marine species use undulating flight in other environments, where, as in the past, it was studied and recognized that in dolphins, salmon, and sharks, but there was no connections made to flight in birds.
To summarize the paper, the study aimed to demonstrate the occurrence of the convergent use of similar gait patterns which resemble undulating flight in 4 marine vertebrate species of sharks and pinnipods. The white shark, the whale shark, the southern elephant seal, and the northern fur seal were observed to all use locomotion to in turn display similar swimming patterns in gliding. This study provides a more descriptive and exploratory approach to convergent evolution, in which it explores the relationship between 4 free-ranging marine vertebrate species and their gait patterns to show resemblance of undulating flight. The researchers posed the question of whether the convergent use of similarity of gait patterns between distinct animal groups will increase the energetic efficiency through common solutions. To summarize the introduction, undulating flight is used by both aquatic and avian animals. This behavioral strategy, used to reduce the expensive energetic cost of locomotion, can be observed in very different environments. Through the use of animal-attached tags, the intermittent glides of 4 marine vertebrate species were observed to be analogous to the undulating flight of flying animals. To summarize the methods, 4 species of marine vertebrates from 2 different taxa were instrumented with data loggers, which recorded changes in locomotory activity with depth through both the acceleration and depth sensors. In southern elephant seals, data loggers were placed in the head of 5 lactating females in October in 2008 in Argentina. For northern fur seals, 5 data loggers were placed on lactating females in Alaska in July of 2008. For white sharks, only 3 data loggers were deployed in Central California in 2009 and 2008. For whale sharks, data loggers were attached to 13 of them in Western Australia, and they were equipped between April and June from 2007 to 2009. 2 basic animal-attached recording systems were used in this study. The multi-sensor data logger recorded acceleration and depth at a fixed frequency, and the pop-up satellite archival tag was used to track the location of the marine animals in the study. Locomotory activity was also determined through OBDA, which scales linearly with oxygen consumption in exercising animals. Individual undulations were also collected for all the species observed, when any flat glide cycle began and ended at the same depth. To calculate the amplitude and vertical velocity of the animal's ascent and descent, the maximum and minimum depth of each undulation was recorded. To summarize the results, we can see in Figure 1 reveals that undulated flight was observed in all 4 marine species, where there was passive gliding as well as interspersed active propulsions or active climbing in their motion, seen in the graphs to the left. Table 2 reveals that there was variability among the 4 species in terms of locomotory output, the sink and climb rate, and the percentage of time used for active locomotion. Figures 2 and 3 display only elephant seal data and reveal that in shallow depths they swam quite continuously, but in deeper depths the seals displayed intermittent locomotion. In Figure 3b, the altering passive descent, gliding, and active gliding pattern that characterizes undulating flight is observed at deeper depths. Figure 3e reveals that in both undulating and continuous flight of the elephant seal, the power requirements increase with swimming speed. During its undulating locomotion, the elephant seal used a smaller range of locomotory power output, thus lowering energetic costs. To summarize the discussion, we see that sharks and seals have behaviors of intermittent locomotion that are analogous to undulating flight in flying animals, despite having distinct evolutionary histories. However, the purpose of both behaviors is for metabolic savings. It is commonly debated that birds perform undulating flight to save mechanical work and because of muscular and/or kinematic constraints, whereas in this study, intermittent locomotion in elephant seals is performed only for energy conservation. Past mechanical models have depicted metabolic power saved through undulating flight in both the water and air. However, this study of aquatic species provides intermittent undulation as the context-dependent method of saving energy costs. There was a variation in the amplitude of vertical movement between marine vertebrates based on the species' motivation for movement as well as its natural buoyancy. There was also likely an adaptation of density on the natural behavior of the species, meaning the factor of density is important to understand the mechanism in which undulating flight occurs. The study observed the convergence of both morphological and behavioral solutions within large-scale migrating marine vertebrates, as they have adopted a common mode of intermittent locomotion which favors energetic conservation, suggesting this movement is selected for naturally.
Our chosen article is specifically related to convergent evolution since it talks about how sharks and seals do not share a common ancestor but have similar swimming, gliding mechanisms in the water, and how sharks and seals do not share a common ancestor with birds but appear to have a similar locomotion mechanism with them that increases speed and efficiency. Sharks and seals use intermittent gliding or a type of undulating, while birds use undulating flight. One article that cited our chosen one is called Convergent Evolution of Mechanically Optimal Locomotion in Aquatic Invertebrates and Vertebrates, which talks about how swimming with elongated fins has evolved in both aquatic vertebrates and invertebrates, as well as demonstrates how undulations along the fins maximizes efficiency and swimming speed and force in these animals. This is definitely related to our chosen study since it specifically looks at some aquatic species that have developed undulations along their fins to create efficient swimming. It may not compare these species to birds, but it does talk more deeply about how several aquatic animals developed similar features through convergent evolution to move efficiently, such as stingrays, cuttlefish, and knifefish. This study has furthered our understanding of convergent evolution since it highlights the basic concepts such that the authors talk about how these species both have a way of moving that may be similar, but made it clear that all of these species do not have a common ancestor, which makes it easy to understand that these species could have potentially undergone convergent evolution. Overall, this study provides a more specific example of how convergent evolution works and that it can occur in any type of species and more often than originally thought. There were several knowledge gaps before this study which were previously mentioned. There are still a few knowledge gaps that remain after the study, which are that we are not sure as to when the shark and seal species had developed this intermittent gliding that resembled undulating flight. We are not sure as to how or why these shark and seal species both developed the same type of mechanism, or if any other aquatic species have developed this gliding movement. If there are not any other species with this movement, then why is it just specific to the shark and seal species from this study? This study taught us that some shark species along with some seal species have a common trait or mechanism with avian species. We had only thought of bats and birds or whales and sharks when it came to convergent evolution, but we now have another more specific example to think of. This also had us realize that convergent evolution is not just specifically traits like wings or fins, but also mechanisms and behaviors like the undulating flight in birds and intermittent diving in aquatic species, bringing us to the fact that convergent evolution does not have to only be broad examples like the wings of birds and bats, but very specific traits like in the study or echolocation in other species. This study definitely gave us a more specific outlook on convergent evolution.
These are our references, and the references highlighted in black is our study that we looked at.